Hey, everybody. Welcome to Decked Out and Dialed In. My name is Stefan, and I'm joined by
Dr. Lohr.
Awesome. Hi, Dr. Lur. How you been? It's been a while.
It's been a little bit. Things have been kind of chaotic. Obviously, the holidays have been up, and my littlest one had a birthday, so things have been
Happy birthday.
Yes, yes, big 7. I got the 7, the 14. It's the gaps, great, but it's been kind of hectic life for me. And I know you've been kind of hitting the ground running with your career and kind of all the 12 balls you're juggling. And
Yeah, you know me. I'm always trying to stay busy in the world of Lorcana, and we have the upcoming Pro Play Summit in Orlando coming up right around the corner, and I've just been heads down, just trying to work on all that. So I'm really happy because I know that you're going, and I'm happy to see a lot of other friends that are going too. So for those of you who might tune in prior to the summit, we'll be there. So if you want to, come say hi to us and tell us what you feel about the podcast so far, that'd be great.
definitely, you can find me in the losers bracket. I'll be working my way up that side of the rankings, and I'm glad to see whoever's there with me.
Awesome. Well, besides catching up, I definitely want to give us a kind of like a little teaser on our subject today. I'm super excited to talk about it. It's somewhat of a controversial subject, but today we're actually going to be diving into the psychology behind cheating in TCGs and kind of why people do it, what goes through people's minds when they like after the fact, prior, whether it's like planned or maybe like an oopsie here or there. But I kind of just, it's been something that's been sitting on the back of my mind for quite a bit. And I knew I wanted to talk to someone like you and kind of get an idea of like what would motivate someone down that, that path of like, well, this is a slippery slope. This is what I can get away with. And, pretty much, yeah. Give me your insight.
This is a challenging topic, and I would encourage anyone listening to give us grace in some extent. I'm going to be talking about kind of the mental side of it. I want to be talking about the concepts that lead us to participate in that. Because we all get exposed to cheating. I remember my first exposure to cheating was in middle school. My middle school football coach, he said, if you ain't cheating, you ain't trying. Like, it was a joke, but like that, we're getting exposed to the idea of competition and this idea of competitiveness and the stakes that come behind that. And, as those pressures build, it can lead us to act outside of our character. It can lead us to engage in behaviors that we tend to rationalize or justify for ourselves. And it also can lead for us to, have just oopsies we make that we don't own up because the pressure's in the moment. So again, I think it's easy for people to jump into the malice side of it, like the pre-planned, I'm going to do this behavior to have a competitive edge. But, my personal belief system, and we can talk again a little bit more about the specific psychology part, is that I think most of the cheating is more impulsive driven and more situational driven, because a lot of times, like we've talked in the past, intensity can directly impact decision making and effective decision making.
Yeah, I mean, those are all great points. And I think one of the things that like I'd like to point out that I think is super relative to the conversation is the fact that kind of like why someone would cheat. Like let's say if someone has expectations on them, whether it's upon themselves or to their team or their social group, right? Like they're known as like the best player in this game, right? And you're in a position where like you're not doing well or like there's a pattern of you not performing as well as you did. Where does that person go in their brain when they're like, I need to stay relative, I need to be sharp, I need to do whatever it takes to win? Like what flips that switch?
So I think it's way before the moment. I think we talked about similar concepts, whether that be intrinsic motivated versus extrinsic motivated. You can also talk about like ego motivated, where like my sense of self, my status, my position is kind of what motivates me and drives me to live up or down to a particular standard. Or it's this extrinsic motivator that like puts this pressure to achieve a certain level of success or repeated success. And so that sets the stage, right? And I want to set the stage kind of like a pressure cooker. You're already up to like halfway pressure in this pressure cooker before you even start the day, before you even start the tournament, right? So then we get into these high stake moments where every loss is a position. A loss could be not even making day 2, right? In some situations. So the added expectation and where we find the value or our perceived value and the pressure of the situation becomes this pressure cooker for poor decision making, and for that can lead us to engage in those kind of cheating behaviors, whether that be more of an active, like doing manipulation of cards, or all the way to drawing too many cards, or manipulating our ink in a certain way that is unfavorable in the matchup. So again, we really got to set the stage of, it's not just a giant moral failing of this person is morally like a bad person. I think it has to do with a lot of factors that all compile that create an environment that would lead someone to do that. Because, it's less likely, I'm not saying it doesn't happen, less likely in like a friendly, fun game that you're going to have that, the same kind of cheating based behavior. I mean, it's still possible. It's still people, I don't know, my 7-year-old cheats at Uno all the time, but like, it's not because of ego inflation. It's because, winning becomes everything. Again, it's more of the extrinsic, I need to win piece. So I don't know if that made sense.
No, it does, and it actually plays very well into the next thing I wanted to talk about it, and I think one of the main drivers for a lot of people too are actually the topic that we brought up before, whether it's actually like the fiscal impact of the game. You like people are probably looking and realizing like I've spent X amount of dollars to travel to this event, like I need to hit this specific tier to either break even or go plus, right? So and to like make it make sense to go to the next event, to the future event, right? So like I feel like there's a lot of pressure. Like if I don't hit this specific part of the day, I've wasted my time, I've wasted my money, I've wasted whatever. And I think that ends up becoming a very selfish thought because you don't think about what you've taken away from your opponents that have also sacrifice the same amount of time and money and energy and looking to play an honest game. And it sucks because I think in a perfect world, that's kind of what we all want are to play great games of whatever game you're playing, Lorcana, for example, since we're familiar with, and have them be honest and have like the true rankings of players based off of skill when it comes to play, deck building, calling the meta. Like we all want to see like what the true sum of that is. But when we have these actors, and I was gonna actually start it off and say bad actors, but when we have these actors that deter what we're all looking for, like with those honest games, or either like playing through like an oopsie or actually maliciously planning or with the intent of cheating,
Hmm.
it robs a lot of people of the experience they're looking for, whether it's a player or spectator. And that's why I feel like there's a lot of passion behind these, what do you want to call them, witch hunts, right? When someone gets like a gotcha, caught you on camera, or like a lot of people are like, well, I've seen this person go to these locals and do this, pattern cheating, and then they start creating like a localized witch hunt. And
Hmm.
it's tough. I think people do want to see justice, but like people also have to understand that they're not the deliverers of justice. Right? There's a system that's supposed to be in place that addresses that. And when I think what happens is that the people, when they feel like the faith in that system isn't met, then
Hmm.
they have to take it upon their own hands to take the social justice route, which seems to be the most impactful, whether like they're trying to remove a player's sponsors, or paint this person like bad publicly, and they're like, I did it, I saved the community from this person. And it sucks because just like you had mentioned before, like there's areas where players may have not intended to cheat and it happened, and someone has to thoroughly explain themselves. I can only imagine how frustrating that can be when you're honestly, you're trying to be an honest player here and you make the mistake, and now you have to sit there and explain yourself the same way someone who does cheat and get away with it and not have to, and it kind of sucks.
Yeah. I think, not to delve too much into that piece, but like that's, unfortunately, when people don't feel, when they feel disenfranchised through the larger system keeping people accountable, the only route they go to is kind of the kind of, social based justice, because that's where it kind of stems from. That whole concept stems from people that feel like they don't have power and agency, and they don't feel like the system is keeping people accountable to keep people accountable. unfortunately, people feel that way. And again, that's a topic or maybe a discussion for a wholly different time. But I think the core
I mean,
piece
you
of it.
can tell that I'm passionate. Like
Yeah.
I'm gonna be honest with you. You guys are gonna hear me yap a lot. We'll probably have to edit out a lot of me just going in circles, but like cheating is a very passionate topic of mine. So like that's why again, I was really excited to be talking with Dr. Laura about this.
And I think you're right. The pressure, the money, all these pieces, right, activate parts of our brain. There's a part of your brain called the amygdala. The amygdala is designed to be activated during things like disgust, anger, anxiety. Its main function is to kinda help us focus. Again, it's like there's a bear over there, your amygdala gets activated, so your brain goes, "Pay attention to that bear," right? And it becomes kinda tunnel focus and becomes very egocentric, survival focused. You kinda think about the, survival part, right? Because that's its core piece of the amygdala is really to kinda keep us focused in on the perceived threat. Now I want you to, paint that picture again like we talked about, the financial investment, the status investment, the pressures, all of these kind of pieces, right? Are building, and then I'm in a game, and then like I'm perceiving this person in front of me as a threat. Right. Again, I'm not justifying any behavior. Like, I'm just, here to explain human behavior per se. And I think that's what it's easy to take a step back and be like, oh, it's another human being across from you. It's all, why aren't they thinking about that person experience, that person's money they spent? Partly because the way their brain's activated, that they're actually seeing that person as the threat to those things. Actually, amygdala looks at that thing as the threat, that person as the threat. Definitely should not refer to people as thing, but like that person is perceived as the threat. So our brain actually doesn't engage in kind of the empathic response that we do in hindsight. We're like, oh, that's a human being, right? You're kind of ruining that for them. Our brain goes, that's the threat to all of this thing. And I need to do something to prevent that threat from hurting me. And that's where we get in really challenging situations. And that's why, we've talked in videos past about emotional regulation and control. And in those moments when we don't have those skill sets and we don't have the tools to manage those, it pushes us farther into making those poor decisions, whether that be, any of the decisions. And this is different than the people that pre-plan some of these things, because that also happens, but it's a similar concept, right? The similar concept of the perceived social economic threats to the competition in general.
Yeah, and do you think that those people use cheating as leverage to stay at that, like, let's just say skill recognition, right? So, like, I think one thing that ends up getting pointed out a lot are that people that are thought that are cheaters tend to not perform well on stream because it's much easier to catch you if again, this is if you're maliciously doing it, right?
Yes.
So someone who that's kind of where we veered it the topic right now, but someone who can, let's say, get away with it at locals, right? You're playing more casual players. They're there for the promos, they don't care. And this is kind of like this could be their practicing area to like hand manipulation, like you said, those things. But like, you get them on stream and like they never can perform on stream, but off stream, like, they're always getting in top cut, stuff like that. And, a lot of people might chalk it up as like stream anxiety, which is a thing.
Oh,
I experience it as well. But it's just, it's, I've always just been very interested about the motivation behind it because like, and maybe that's just me being a nice guy, right? Because even like before a game, like in Milwaukee, I greeted every player the same way, right? I'm typically very friendly no matter how nervous I am because of my position, so like I was doing very well in the beginning. And I noticed that as I kept going on, the players were less and less friendly and very stern, right? Like you could tell that they were focused, right? And for me, like when I'm anxious, like it's hard for me to focus. So I usually, it's like small talk is what gets me through that, right?
yeah.
But then after the fact, when the outcome of the game has been defined, then, if they're not as upset, they can get very friendly, right? So like, it's interesting because like things like that, for example, while me, I'm trying to break the ice to kind of make things nice, like them, they could be thinking about things like, what if this person in front of me is like gonna cheat, right? So instead of me having to focus on just my game, now I have to focus and watch to make sure they're drawing the right amount of cards. Like, how many times have you asked your opponent, how many cards in hand, how much, what ink are you at, right? Things that like should, for the most part, be very open and in a representative state. However, some people will just take their hand and stack it, right? So then you have to ask them, hey, how many cards? But yeah, it's just, sorry, I may be going on a tangent about it, but like I think what, like I'm just trying to look at the opposite side of it, right? So like protecting yourself from that and feeling like the the ability to have to, right? It's nice when you have insight because let's face it, let's be honest here. Everybody talks, right? Especially in like the social settings in your local play area, there might be an individual or two that does questionable behavior that we all kind of, hey, watch out for this, watch out for that. So, they kind of already make a mark on themselves, but then you're focusing on, again, their play, their line of play, not just like how they're counterplaying you, which you can't do in Lorcana, but you know what I mean. Like,
Yeah.
they you have to watch their hand consistently, and it's just, it makes it for not a fun game because now I feel like I'm policing the game rather than playing it.
And I think also, for a lot of people, especially people that have a certain perspective on competition, they might look at competition as me versus you. And now you're the threat to my goal. On top of like, I want to make sure that I'm being very diligent on everything, every piece of data that I can get, whether that be, because there's the other side. I've experienced play and in competitive play where four or fives in a turn being asked, how much ink do I have? What did I ink last? When you have multiple things in the bag, pressuring me to pick the thing I want in the bag next. And kind of that course of behavior to kind of like frustrate people. I think people try to get a competitive edge in a lot of ways when they look at competition as me versus you. That can lead to some really challenging behaviors, right? And again, I think the people you look at that have been maybe identified as engaging in malicious behavior, cheating, whatever you want to call it, even the responses to them really come from this place of like, it's not my fault, me versus this thing. I made the best decision for me, right? And it because that's what I think how do I word this? Someone that maybe hasn't participated in healthy competition can look at outwardly to competitiveness is what it should look like, but that's not what it looks like. Because you can't sustain that. You can't sustain me versus everyone in front of me and be successful. We talked about this with motivation. We've talked about this with anxiety. We've talked about this in so many other podcasts about this idea of like this extrinsic locus of control and how damaging that can be to our well-being in the sport of TCG. We've talked, in our own mental health, and we have, and again, I think unfortunately, because the rules of Lorcana are written the way they are, again, not making any negative statement about the rules, but allowing grace in some competitive sense. But the last DLC, the takesy backsies, having some grace built in is understandable. But again, with any rule, you're going to find people to try to find the workaround, right? It's impossible to say that this isn't going to happen. It's just about, as a community, how we want to engage with the thing, but also like as an individual, how am I approaching my competition? How am I approaching competitive play? And again, I think the people that you notice that you sit down across to and they're friendly, but they're at the top tables, are looking at it as this kind of intrinsic skill development, growth, consistency piece where the people that you sit down and they won't barely talk to you. And then if they win, they'll chat you up. But if they lose, they storm off. That's a me versus you type of individual. And that's a lot of pressure. That's an individual that is probably under a lot of performative based stress or anxiety, and it's that has an impact, whether it be an individualistic impact emotionally or a community based impact.
Yeah, and I think that impact probably drives things like ego off the wall, right? Because then you have those who tend to apply that pressure to themselves, whether again they're the source of the pressure or external pressure, and then they deliver, and then they feel that they are this person that they've strived to become. You're the best X player in X game or like, best blue steel player in the area, right? And they live off of that, right? And then what comes with that? There's like reinforcement behavior, like they're saying that he's the best blue steel player, so now I'm going to chat him up about blue steel, and it becomes very like cylindrical, right? So it kind of feeds into itself, and then what happens when you don't perform,
Yeah.
right? What happens when you don't do well? Like what again, hitting those like those moral touch points about like, what do I do? Do I own up you know what? Like, let me blame the meta. Let me blame this set didn't treat Sapphire right, which, every set treats Sapphire right, let's be honest. But just navigating through like identifying yourself as a specific player of a specific deck, and then like you have to try to do something so performative to show that no, my deck is still alive or I'm still the best at this deck in a world where like on paper maybe you shouldn't be. And I think that can kind of play into that as well too.
Yeah, when we wrap our ego and our identity into something, right, that leads to directly a fear of like a loss aversion. So loss aversion being kind of this intense emotional response to perceived loss or perceived potential loss that leads to like maybe some impulsive or intense based behaviors. That could be anger, that could be anxiety, that can be potentially cheating. So like, that loss aversion gets wrapped up in that. But like I think that circles back to that piece of like that status, that external, like that expectation, right? And in so many people, this is in every sport, right? So many people have peak performance. If you look at sports psychology, we talk about peak performance in the rate in the area you have to be in emotional and mental space. You have to be the arousal levels called like keep yourself in the orange, right? It's kind of like the red is like too anxious and below that is not stimulated enough. So this orange level is where we can be in flow and have peak performances. And what happens is so many people will have a peak performance. They'll go out and like they'll top, either locals or Ks or big tournaments or even DLCs. And then this like idea of like, no, that peak performance now has to be repeated. It no longer is a peak performance for me anymore. That is now the expectation for me. And when we have a peak performance, we have to look at it like a peak performance. Like this is the peak of my play, and the expectation should actually be somewhere between that experience and maybe a bad experience. So that's where my average should lie. But then people put themselves like, nope, if I did it once, I should be able to do it every single time. And that is a position to really set a stage for poor self-based behaviors, right? The pressure, the beating ourselves up, the anger, the frustration towards ourselves, and then poor external based behaviors, potential cheating, potential poor community engagement, things of that nature. So like again, all of these like pressures and anxieties really can eat us alive if we're not really being mindful of like where our motivators are at, how we're managing our emotions, what pressures we're placing on ourselves. Is those pressures even realistic?
Yeah, and I think once you're in that area and you become comfortable with that area, I think we start looking at the the aspect of like disengaging. So like, you realize like, okay, I, whether I do get away with it or like if this behavior is appropriate, we look at concepts of like, well, either everybody else does it or, because you've performed at or a peak performance, like I deserve the win. Like, why do you deserve the win over 2,047 other people? Right. Or even looking at, oh, well, it's not a big deal. Like it's not a big deal to you, but it's a big deal to the people who are looking to, play an honest game. Right. So like taking that away from your opponent, like that's not fair. That and we could sit here and talk at like a world of like what's fair and what's not and how fairness gets delivered or how justice, deals with that. But, in the end of the day, like I'm pretty sure your intention when you started this game was not to cheat. At
Mhm.
least I'd like to think so.
Oh, and I think, to bring up what you said is because this cheating thing is desensitization for a lot of it, right? It's just like I use a great example when we talk about desensitization to an experience or doing a behavior, right? Is this idea of like the first time you were speeding in your vehicle, you probably were anxious. You're probably like, oh, I shouldn't have done that. And you probably were only going like a couple miles an hour over. But the more more you sped, right? You might start off small, right? And the more and more you sped and didn't get pulled over, and, then 5 over was fine, and then, okay, 10, and then, obviously, we are in Florida, so then, like, 15, 20 mile an hour over on the highway, becomes, like, the norm, and it becomes like, "Oh, this is just normal behavior in these environments." Again, I'm not saying speeding is okay and not advocating speeding, please do not hear that, but we become desensitized to engaging in it, but we did have the buildup of our kind of morals and values, but like you said, like there was no consequence for the action. So since there was no consequence for the action, and I'll add on to this in a second. And also consequences don't necessarily change behavior either. Like people think they do, but they case in point, how many days after your last speeding ticket were you speeding again? Right? There was a consequence for the behavior, but guess what happened? A week, two later, we're back speeding a little bit, right? And becoming desensitized to that behavior. So again, you can't just say it's because there's no punishment, because again, punishment doesn't necessarily, what research shows in my field, that punishment really doesn't always shape human behavior like we think it is. Incentivization does. We know this for a fact in my field, that if we incentivize good behavior, we're more likely to engage in good behavior. Punishment doesn't necessarily always change poor behavior. I'm not saying let's not punish or do anything. Like, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying what's more effective, and it's I think highlighting in I don't know if I was having a conversation with you after the last DLC, or someone else, about the idea of like kind of having like superlatives at big Lorcana events and being like, this idea, like, the players are the most like like the Mickey Award, or like these like,
Yeah, I remember that.
I think it was one of our conversations here, and I think, highlighting that aspect, and again, that's not gonna make it no one cheap, but I guess what I'm leading to is saying, like, there needs to be a system of accountability, but also to recognize that just because someone's kept accountable doesn't mean it's going to change other people's behavior. We have to have a culture in a system that prioritizes good management of our own emotions, healthy competition, and really incentivizing effective good play.
Yeah, I agree. And I think like l- we can get really philosophical here, but I'm gonna keep it super short. But I like to think that like the punishment system is archaic and probably worked very well where there wasn't a lot of agency for community to look for that. What was it? You used encouragement to that, right? So like before, like it actually was super impactful for someone to sit in jail for X amount of days, right? And they come out and like, I never want to do that again. Versus like people who, are habitually in jail, they're like, oh, well, it's just I'm doing it again. And, stealing is what does it for me, right? Or like the what I get from that is worth more than what I would lose if I were to spend X amount of days in jail. And like that as a society, like, again, we can get philosophical, but we're focused on cheating here. That's what we're talking about.
Yes.
But yes, and then like, thinking about it, so like one of our key points for this show that I'd like to kind of focus in on is like what is the risk versus the reward calculation here, right? So, you know, we're talking about what prevents someone who's, farming a place out of promos and locals for, I'll make sure I'm top cut every single time. However your store, awards those, right? Versus like this match determines whether or not I get this golden Mickey, right? So like, do I happens if I get caught? I get disqualified and I lose out on the Mickey. But what happens if I don't? I get a better chance at getting it.
And I think, we have to look at this in two different realms. Well, what leads us to cheat? I think we've kind of highlighted that, like the pressures in the status and the reward based system. And I think we've talked a little bit about the discouragement, in which I don't think necessarily right now there is a restorative piece to that. I think that that's needed. You know, when athletes do get caught cheating, when they do engage in malice, what is the system in place to help people learn, grow? You know, case in point, we're using this with speeding. If I got caught speeding, what kind of driving class do I need to take to be able to then get my license back, and then or you know, points off my license? And there's a system set up for to give people opportunity to grow and change. Again, we can't force people because again, sometimes that thing inside of your brain just says the benefits outweighs the cost at all costs, and you're just not going to change that because that's an individualistic. And also we talked about the desensitization piece of like, well, I've done it 10 times and only been caught once, so 1 out of 10 actually is odds in my favor. So like, in I haven't really got anything really negative happen. So like, but I think also on top of that, having an environment where we really prioritize, you know, good mental health, good distress tolerance, highlighting athletes that are really great, community oriented, really great athletes of managing their own emotions effectively. I think that also as a community we need to kind of bolster, because right now I feel like the individuals that do get brought up as cheating tend to be more quote unquote popular and talked about more than the athletes that are doing it right and doing the things that like should be highlighted. And I think as a community, to me, that's not the greatest sign because I'm like, okay, like we're sticking on these individuals that don't deserve that. They should have a restorative, get back into good graces and potentially play this game. But like as a community, what is that doing? Like, you know, sends that message again. Now I sit across with a person and I'm assuming that they might be cheating. And now I'm engaging. That builds the pressure and that can build a place where I'm being suspicious and can eat away a community. You know, that in itself is healthy. So like, again, this is threading a needle, but like I think as a community have to find that great balance of like what happens when these people engage in this. How can they have restorative properties to like that, you know, that process of coming back from, you know, engaging in, you know, malice behavior. But I think it's a little more simplistic than we think. It's pressure and stress, amygdala engagement, and then poor decision making that gets intensified over time of being desensitized to engaging in it. Right.
Yeah. And I mean, like, we can look at the both sides of the coin here for this one, for example. So, like, let's take first example, right? And these are already talked about individuals that have kind of, I think they've gone through. We're not trying to stir up anything more than they've experienced, but you know, just again, looking at the two outcomes that happen here, right? So, first one, last year, I think we had the individual named by Chris Croy. He was playing at a DLC and ended up doing well enough. I think he ended up second, right? So ends up getting a Golden Mickey invite to Nats, right? And then he ends up visiting Vegas, right? And ends up getting paired into Zan Syed, right? Who, I mean, I think we all know who that is. No introduction needed. But Zan called the judge on him because he had too many cards in his hand, right? And from what I understand from the situation, again, this is all just like what I've collected from doing research, is that this wasn't the first incident that day, right? So more or less, what ends up happening is I think Chris ends up getting disqualified from the event, ends up chalking it up to nerves, and you know, like again, it, it's tough because you know it's really in this game, let alone any other game really, it is super hard to prove intent, right?
Oh,
I
yeah,
think
yeah.
that's the defining line is that like, you know, someone could like if they have sweaty hands, right? They could draw more. They don't mean to. There are in the rules, there are dexterity errors and how to correct them. So like at least some of this has been thought out, right?
Yeah.
But when it comes to, you know, the two things that typically don't lie, which are patterns and numbers, like it's really hard to make an argument in their favor. So, you know, over time, I'm sure there was a lot of social pressure that got to Chris, but ultimately he ended up writing a pretty long, lengthy letter, pretty much stepping away from Lorcana as a result. I believe he did not end up going to Nats, but like again, think about it, right? What if he was the honest player that he wanted to be or that everybody wanted him to be, right? And then lost out on that opportunity and he decided to bow out versus
Yeah.
the other coin. The other side of the coin is I'm trying to remember his name. He ended up playing in the DLC in Australia, right? He was playing a Ruby Amethyst.
Mhm.
I think he goes by the name of Ra Clem, right?
Yeah.
Clement, I think is his name.
Clement, yeah, it's
Yeah,
Clement, yeah.
and um, he while and like he's got some history, right? I don't want to dive into that. I'm just talking about this particular incident where like it was proven that he was like really just rule sharking based off of the interactions and ended up costing the opponent an opportunity for a golden Mickey. Right. And from what I understand, it was a newer player as well, too. So imagine the experience that that guy was having, right? First DLC ever gone to. I get this far and like because of this incident like I'm out of this, and thankfully Ravensburger actually stepped in and awarded him one, which was good on their part. There was a lot of fallback, or sorry, not fallback, fallout, right, as to what happened. So like that forced Clement to like issue an apology. A lot of people to this day still don't like believe it.
Mhm.
And he's actually come back recently. I think he's joined a team that they had this like kind of long post on Twitter that indicated that like, people are redeemable essentially. Maybe not the best role model for that, but again, that's to, everyone's opinion on that is their own.
Yeah.
But he's kind of leaned into the like guess who's back type stuff. Like he's named himself in certain things. So
A
it's
little
just
bit of a heel perspective.
exactly, right? Like, he's pretty much like, "F it." Like, if this is what people are gonna think I am, then I'm just gonna lean into it. And, you know, it sure, it's I think short term, it's comedic, but just think about, like, how now every opponent that plays against him that knows his history
Mhm.
will he will be watched. He will
Yeah.
be watched like a hawk.
And I think that's the piece that, in both scenarios that needs to be there is this restorative piece, right? Because like, even the first example you use, maybe he won his first golden Mickey fair, and then the pressure got to him, and he made dexterity errors. Maybe it was purpose, maybe it wasn't. But the first one was great, and then we lost a great player based on that piece, right? And everyone can say, "Well, if he cheated, he wasn't a great player." Again, I'm not here to argue morals and values. I'm just kind of here to talk about as a community. I think the piece we're missing is the restorative piece, right? Even in both scenarios, what behaviors are these people engaging in post cheating? Even if, and again, not to name names, let's say there was an individual that their sleeves tend to have some issues with them, right? If you came out and stated like, "A, it's my equipment. I need to be responsible for my equipment. Here's what I'm going to do behaviorally. This is what I'm going to engage in." And then as Lorcana, as a community, like again, like I keep using the driver safety course, right? It can be something as simple as that, but a behavior someone has to get in to show that, hey, I'm putting effort and I'm putting intention into this. Even, the sleeve, that is remnant of someone that got in trouble for their sleeves, right? Even as simple as like going on your social media accounts and posting you re-sleeving your deck. You can keep the cards face down so no one knows you play. And you're showing breaking a new box, putting them in the thing, putting those in. I just did that in front of everyone and showing my sleeves. That's a restorative justice piece because the onus is on you once you've gotten kind of flagged as what behavior am I going to engage in to show the community, to show individuals that I am taking that feedback. Even if I want to say I'm not a cheater, but I didn't take responsibility for my actions. I made a mistake, right? Case in point. Or even, again, I'm not gonna throw names out there, but just jump in like, I dropped a card. Okay, I dropped a card. Owning my cards are my responsibility. I should have made sure I counted my cards. Here's how I'm going to remedy that. But also Ravensburger having something that is a restorative piece, whether it be taking a judge's course or taking a course. And I'm just like, again, I keep going back to the driving thing because I think it's applicable to everyone. Is like, if you get something you're driving, there are driving courses you can take. They can be online. They can be and it's a way to show a behavior. I'm trying to grow. I'm trying to be better. And I think that's the restorative piece that we're missing. And that I think that is also, as a community, why a lot of people get frustrated, because it's like there was no behaviors taken to be able to restore individuals back into good graces. So then everyone just goes with this perspective of that, they're just a cheater being, not getting punished. Again, not going too far down there, but the psychology behind that piece is kind of like when we have this aspect of our brain when a certain thing is like we deem it a level 8 out of 10 bad thing, we want an 8 or 10 a cause and 8 or 10 based consequence, especially cause, 'cause our brain wants that equity or not equity, but the balance. So again, if you see someone cheating, that's why everyone goes, it's malice. They planned that they were going to do that because because cheating is such a big deal. They want there to be some big explanation to why it happened. But for most people, it's an impulsive based decision. It just is. But again, having the restorative pieces, having something set up to, and again, the onus is on the person that has been identified as being a cheater. There's restorative arcs to have if you want to put the effort into having that. And that's individuals, and that's a whole nother video. But again, I really want to highlight the aspect of cheating and how we recover from cheating. And a lot of the individuals that have cheated, we'll talk about pressures placed on, talk about sports athletes like Lance Armstrong, where he talked about taking performance enhancing drugs, right? His whole video was talking about like the pressures that were on me to perform. And it was just like so intense that like and then I justified the behavior because of the intensity. But imagine if we could manage those emotions more effectively. We didn't have this intensity, this expectation. That behavior wouldn't have been engaged in, right? That is the core crux of all of the kind of talk we're having today is like emotional regulation, the pressure, where we perceive our value inside of this space, and how we value the top athletes in this space, because that has something to do with it too. When we put these people on these pedestals, not only are we creating an environment where it's like, oh, I want to chase this level of status, but also we're putting people there that then they have to like perform up to that status. I couldn't imagine the pressure of being a DKP or a pressure of being a Zan or pressure of being any of these top athletes at any top competition. I couldn't imagine what that felt.
Yeah, I mean, I think naturally they just apply that pressure to themselves because they just it again, peak performance, right? And a lot of these players, they have a lot more to lose than the more traditional player, right? So majority of these players are sponsored, right? Their sponsorships are going to expect some level of performance that keeps, whether it's the team name or the sponsorship, maybe it's a company that's like they want their name in highlights, right? So like how do we do that? We sponsor players that are constantly performing or doing well on social media or what essentially whatever, and then these players, they look at the value that they provide, right? Or they look at these agreements, and you're probably right. Like, like I am planned to go to like the next 10 top level competitive Lorcana events around the world, right? Which has a lot of time commitment, a lot of money commitment. And if I'm speaking to sponsors and saying, well, I can commit to performing well, across these events, I'll put, your brand name on my jersey or whatever the agreement may be, right? However, they have to deliver something which, as someone who has worked in professional services, it's a lot easier to provide reasonable deliverables. But like it's really hard for someone who's competitive that can say like, "I'm gonna win the World Series this year," right? There's so many things involved that you can't control. You have X amount of players on your team, like, what if there's injuries? What if, like, you guys just have a bad run? But, like, there's so many bad things. So how can someone say, like, "I'm going to do this," and have so many factors outside of their favor, like what closes that gap, right?
And I think the added pressure to that is like the limited nature of Lorcana. I mean, I'm not saying anything negative about that, but as a TCG right now, we're not Pokemon. We're not Magic the Gathering that has larger bases and more opportunity to make money. I mean, even look at social media based stuff. Like if you go and look at Pokemon content and content related to Magic, right? Those views versus like some of the highest viewed people in Lorcana are just not the same. So like there is this kind of scarcity, also scarcity principle of those sponsorships, of those people that are engaging in Lorcana, because it's still in its development and still growing and still creating its own identity as it moves forward, especially after rotation. So I think, again, that added pressure, see, all these layers we're talking about is just another added layer of pressure on the competitor to engage in, either the competitor that's already at that level to maintain that, or the competitor that's trying to bubble into that level to get that. That is an intensity that I can't even imagine what that feel like.
Yeah, and I mean, like, again, that's why these players are where they at, and some of we have up and coming players that will probably experience that well, but, like, again, it's I hate to see people heading to the dark side, if that makes sense, right? Like, there are some players that you'd be like, they could never, like, I could never in a million years expect them to cheat, and then something happens, just like, it's, like, heartbreaking, right? Because you're like, you think that, like, these are role models and stuff like that, or people look up to you, or, they're buying your Medify, or a lot of these things, and then they realize, like, wait a second, like these merits aren't real because what did you do to get here? And it sucks. It sucks. I hate seeing that for like everyone involved, or like the people that are like, wow, like, 'cause imagine being a player on a team, right? Where you practice with, and I like to think that everybody is practicing with honest intent, but then you're performing well, and like the team's like, wow, you're doing a fantastic job, keep it up, and again, you're in that vicious circle where, like, what happens if I don't perform well, what happens if I don't make top cut all the time, stuff like that, and then it leads you to those questionable behaviors, and like, I feel like what happens is the player doesn't realize the negative impact that happens
Yeah.
before it's too late, because being able to climb back into the, like, let's just put it this way, you'll never I don't think you'll ever get back to the position that you were once in, no matter how much type, like, whatever rectification you tried to do, course correction, like, I think people will always be like, remember that time they did X, and that's something that people end up living with, which you know, it sucks, but I think that's part of why it's a learning experience, right? Or the motivation to not do that again.
Yeah, and I hear you, and that takes me that that Ted Lasso quote, "May all of us or none of us be judged by our weakest moments," right? And I think at the end of the
Wait, no,
day,
there's no way. Not with the internet. The internet wants blood.
oh, I hear you. I do, trust me, I hear you on that. But I think that circles me back to like cheating is a desensitization to it. It's a pressure. It's an amygdala response. It's an intensity. It's an impulsivity for most circumstances of cheating. And I think, we have to approach it like that. Again, the larger malice is going to be there, but how does someone have restorative? How, there is, like you said, there is this small desensitization, right? That I accidentally drew too many cards and didn't get caught this turn. Okay, that was okay. I'm not trying to draw an extra card, and maybe that happens again in the same tournament. Okay, well, all right, well, hey, I did it twice, didn't get caught, and like it wasn't on purpose, so like maybe from a hard spot, I accidentally draw another one, and then we just, we become desensitized to that thing. But I think, having models we can look up and incentivization to not engage in that behavior, I think that is a key to the dynamic. We just can't be fire and brimstone with individuals that do. We also have to have an incentive to recover from blunder, but also incentivize people that don't engage in those behavior and really hold those people up in the sport as role models, I guess we could say. And I think that there's opportunity for that in certain, like we even talked about in our last video about like, certain athletes really stepping up and defending certain behaviors and players and even younger players and really being those role models. And I think we need more of that in this space.
Yeah. You bring up a good point, and before we end up closing this out, I did wanna mention one thing. So, like, there in the Riftbound, community, there was a player who actually used to play in Lorcana that was on streams. Savitz, I think is his name, and he had a interesting issue happen during one of his stream matches in Lorcana where, he it was one or the other. He played a How Far I'll Go, but treated it like the effect for the grammatala or the other way around. And I could see how those would be confusing because I've done it and I'm not a red blue player and I'll never be one because they're bad. Sorry, well, we may or may not cut that. But so like that happened and you know, he caught a lot of flack, made a huge response about it, and a lot of people came to his defense, right? So Riftbound recently had, I think one of its largest third-party events happen over the past weekend, where he's been talking about the game nonstop since its inception. So clearly, a strong content creator in that game ends up going and ends up also running into a situation where he didn't play the card properly, but it happened multiple times, right? So, like again, like went through this whole reason as to why, said like, and a lot of other people came to his defense too. Like, listen, they did both Swiss and Top Cut same day. Like a lot of players, it was a long day. Like the game is new. Like we're still like getting used to it, and it I mean, it just sucks because those things like follow you, right? They follow you, and he actually has a pretty strong history with Hearthstone. The great thing about digital clients are like I think it's very hard, if not impossible, to cheat,
Yeah,
whether it's intentional or not, because
yeah,
the game is like a lot of it is scripted already, and there's a lot of automation. So like you're literally here are the highlighted cards you can play at this point of the interaction, so, going from someone who plays a digital client completely to someone who plays paper or transitioning to paper, that could be you're leaning on the crutch of the digital client versus like actually understanding and maintaining proper game state. There's an argument for that too. And like ultimately at the end of the day, like, I don't think any of us want to see malicious cheaters in this game or any game for that matter.
yeah,
And I
yeah,
think that those that have the oopsies or follow through with the oopsies can, realize the impact that it has on, you know, not only yourself, the opponent you're playing, the community you're playing in or playing for, the team you're playing for, right? Like it's a lot more than just I drew an extra card. Like, and that is something that I think that whether it's through reflection after the fact has happened. And again, I'm not saying I'm perfect. I'm sure I've drawn an extra card or two, but like that's the thing.
yeah,
It's like it's tough because like again, you have that conversation like, was it intent? Was it not? And I know that in the instances where I've said, hey, look, I drew a card. How do you want to handle it? Right.
yeah,
So like, they'll say, oh, well, just the extra card you drew, or like fan your hand out and I'll pick one and shuffle. Like again, it gets figured out, it's done at a local level, like, I'm not saying like case shut, like, or case closed, like, shut the book, but, like, I think it's just recognizing that because, like, I couldn't imagine the way that I would feel if I followed through with some type of oopsie or worst case, malicious,
mm,
and ended up top cut and got my golden Mickey. And like how why would I want to associate a memory, a core memory, right? Like
yeah,
I've tried so hard, right? But I convinced myself my skill wasn't enough and I had to cheat in order to do that. Like I don't know how
yeah,
people live with that, to be honest with
yeah.
you.
And again, I think, yeah, even for speaking for myself, like, I've never made the mistake of inking an uninkable off of a sale because I am so used to playing TPO. It's never happened one time, and then they'll be like, "You can't ink." I'm like, "I know that. Oops, my bad." But I to circle back. But yeah, I mean, so that's the quote that why assign malice where ignorance is more likely to be the culprit, but at the same token we need to have a system that's set up to help people grow, become back into the sport, so we don't have to have the secondary social justice piece or have it as it be an intense piece because people feel like there's a lack of accountability. I think that's a whole another conversation for a whole another day, but I think, at the end of the day, we got to look at the human brain and what the human brain tends to do. And a lot of these decisions are intensity and pulse based decisions. And, yes, those decisions could be at 5 different top tier events, but guess what? What happens at every one of those events? Pressure. What happens at every one of those events? The person's in a position where they have to perform. So is it a moral failing, or is it an intensity failing of my coping strategies, which compromises my morals and my values? Again, that's my fancy psychology speak of just like I make really crappy decisions when I get overwhelmed, and I repeatedly make crappy decisions when I get overwhelmed. And how do we grow from that? Individually is working on that piece, and as a community, finding ways to have some standards and things set up to have some restorative justice, so allow people to kind of come back into the community in good graces and show that they're actively putting work in to be better competitors, and make the more effective decisions in those moments. And I think that's what we need as a whole.
Yeah, and I mean, like, again, just, lean into your community, lean into your team, like, right? Like, I think one of the biggest things I'm really proud of the team that I'm a part of is one of our teammates, Nasif. I know that we were talking about like the D&D lineman chart like prior to this call, but like Nasif is like so lawfully good that it's like he's this is a very sensitive topic for him, like, when it comes to cheating and stuff like that, so he'll always chime in on, like, the conversation. He's like, "Get him out of here," but, like, he I'm sure he views it from the same lens that a lot of other people do, like, you're when you do that, you're stealing, like, like, whether it's intentional or not, you're stealing the time, the money, the motivation for the other players that honestly got to where they were, and eventually you're going to slip up. You are going to get caught, and it will catch up to you, and, everyone else that played you prior will not receive the justice that they are due because it's too late, right? And it just sucks.
You're right. And the other side of the coin is, if we have a community that is fire and brimstone for blunders, right? Then people don't want to play. Again, threading that needle, finding a system, restorative justice, potentially also a system that has some accountability inside of that and incentivizes the good decision making in those moments. I think that is where we really need to highlight the community is we can't be defined by the minority of individuals that are cheating and engaging in cheating. We need to be defined by the majority, which are not, and highlighting those and in incentivizing those behaviors. Because there's always gonna be a small section of the population that's just going to cheat, and there's zero that we can do about that thing. I'm talking about, if you think about a bell curve, the majority of people that cheat are going to be more impulse oriented. It's not going to be the person that like, I'm going to master stacking my deck, or I'm going to master every single rule so I can like, pull this obscure rule out and to use it in this particular time. It's going to be more, the majority of people are going to be impulse decision with high level of anxiety or stress. And again, it's those the people I'm speaking to. I'm not necessarily speaking to the very small minority of individuals that are doing like intensive like stacking the deck. I don't know how anyone can do that, but I can barely shuffle, let alone stack a deck. So
Practicing die rolls, purchasing questionable dice. Yeah, I think those people we're not getting through to, and that's fine. That's okay.
my card stacking is putting every one of my good cards at the bottom of my deck and, and putting all my bad cards right where in the middle where I need good cards. That's how I stack the deck.
Yeah, so you're playing hard mode. Totally get it.
All four of my Hades are at the bottom of my deck, just having a tea party.
Well, that's good because now since you're playing Blurple, you have 8 Hades now, so hopefully the other 4 get to the top somehow.
I'm a emerald sapphire enthusiast.
Oh, okay,
Also,
never mind.
we're
You
dabbling. We're dabbling right now.
dabbling? Oh, yeah, me, I like I told you, I haven't played as much Lorcana as I want to lately, even though the meta I feel like is in a really good spot. But I have a couple of my favorites built. I've got Purple Steel, Blurple, and Blue Steel as well. Just wait, I got Steel Song waiting in the wings for when it's coming back. Set 23. I'm counting.
At the end of the day, like I think it's a great meta. Even looking at some of the last DLC, like I think we had like 4, 5, or 6 different, I think 4 or 5 different color pairings represented in the top, top 8 or 12. And that's like, to me, that's great that like, multiple decks are seeing success, multiple decks are playable. And it's not just like the 8,000th mirror match of the day and how nauseating that can feel sometimes. And as a former Ruby Amethyst player who totally misses Ruby Amethyst bounce everything back to hand and draw 1,000 cards and then play B prep. Like there is something in my heart about a board wipe, but do I enjoy doing nothing for the first 6 turns? No, I do not enjoy doing nothing for the first 6 turns.
That's funny. I mean, since we're talking about it, if Richmond was tomorrow, what would you be bringing?
So I'm going to caveat this with I have some amazing friends in the community. Again, I talk with Humble from in R&B a lot from Team Maelstrom because they're in my local community and they're great guys. If it came to a Humble and he would be like, "You're playing green blue, and that's what you're playing." Up in my heart, I'll be playing Blurple, but that's just because I'm a sucker for having 50,000 cards in my hand and being like, I have options versus like, I hope I get this Clarabelle. Please give me a Clarabelle.
Yeah, you're
What
flying
about
by the
you?
seat of your pants in that deck for sure. My team calls it Charizard because you either have the badges to play that deck or you don't, and it doesn't listen to you.
What about you? What would you play?
It's a toss up between Blurple and Purple Steel. I really think Amethyst continues to be a strong color from set one. Like I think pretty much any color you pair it with has a very slight advantage in the early and mid games. Late game, when you had the board wipe, it was great. But now I feel like there's only so much drawing and recursion that you can do before like decks that like blue steel for example, they're constantly dropping a bomb every turn. Like there's only so much Amethyst X decks can do. But I did my best ever performance at a DLC playing Blurple. Not much has changed. We got a couple more Hades, which feels nice. I'm absolutely in love with the Woodchuck book. I think it's our the closest we're ever going to get to a friends on the other side that doesn't get ripped by the hand, except if someone's playing Mowgli. But I think that's probably where I would land, and we'll see if anything changes. I mean, again, the meta's so wide, and
Yeah.
I like that. I know a lot of other people don't. They prefer more narrow so that you can target certain decks, but we saw a plethora of decks win some DLCs and CCQs over the weekend. Was that Blurple won a Singapore DLC? Blue Steel won a CCQ. Um, yeah, there's just like I constantly look at the decks on Ink Decks, and I'm very happy to just see like there's just so many options. It feels like a really good time to be a Lorcana player.
In that Ruby Amethyst deck that's out there, if it pops off, it's hard. I mean, Diablo's a card, man. Just that 3/3 on 2, that quest for 2 is a card.
You
So
know who used to have that? Steel Song. Just FYI. But yes, me with Rapunzel was crazy.
oh man, it's me with Rapunzel days. Back when Rapunzels were like 74.99 for one.
Yes. And I still have my non-foil DLC season 1 playset of those. I refuse to let them go. She will come back.
I mean, I at the end of the day, again, I'm not a designer, but like, I get why some people don't like board wipes, and I get why people do. I do miss B prep because it was a fair board wipe. And when by fair, it means we all had started from scratch again. So like, but at the end of the day, we have what we have. I think the meta is in a good place, and I'm excited for it. I'm excited to see you. I'm excited to play a little competitive Lorcana because again, I haven't really played much since the last DLC. So I'm excited to get over to Orlando and see you and play some Lorcana.
Yeah, and if any of our watchers are watching, if you haven't gotten a ticket yet, pick one up. I love that we're having a summit in somewhat of our backyard. I like that I don't have to fly to this one.
Yeah.
But it so far the numbers look pretty good. Like we have a really strong showing for Riftbound, which is a really exciting game to follow right now. Lorcana is still holding strong too, and then a Cookie Run as well too, which is really interesting to follow. But yeah, I'm super happy. I'm going to see you again. Um, I still didn't realize how tall you were from Milwaukee. You're a mountain, dude. You just
Yeah,
sit
I mean,
back in
some
that
people
chair.
like they being 6'4", sometimes people walk up and be like, "You're a lot bigger in person." I'm like, "Yeah, well."
But yeah, well, with that being said, let's wrap up. I know that we talked about the summit and stuff like that. Any last minute things. I want to start something on this podcast, and I'm going to take it from a podcast I used to watch for web development. Is a podcast called Syntax, and they would do this segment called Hot Picks. right? So like each person would just say something or like, either a hobby or activity they're doing outside of the subject that they're talking about. And you learn a lot of really cool things or a lot of interesting things from people because they would have guests on too. So like while they're 99% of the time talking about web development, like they'll follow up with, yeah, and I like smoking meat over the weekend. So like I got this new smoker and I'm like, okay, this is interesting. So I hate to put you on the spot, but we'll start with you. Anything interesting? What's going on your side of the Florida area?
So, for me, it's been a season of family, reconnecting family, kind of really taking care of my home. So I learned how to and installed almost 3,000 square foot of AstroTurf in my backyard because when I got a quote for that, and I was like, I'm not doing that. So I learned how to do it myself. So I've been in kind of the home improvement phase of my life. And then, obviously like kind of becoming a little more connected with family. I work a lot, I work Monday through Friday and the weekends, and as well as try to dabble in the social media piece. So I've just been trying to really connect with family because it's my grounding place is kind of family and intellectual stimulation as well. So like that's been my place of kind of like what I've been dabbling in recently. What about yourself?
Yeah, so the kids were out last week, so I got to spend a lot of time with them, which is somewhat related, but I've been really enamored with my daughter's bead making ability. So she has been following YouTube videos. Look, I get to show it now. Hold on. She made me this,
Wow.
which is like one of her first. Well, like no, no, wow, don't give her credit because now the ones that she's doing are like insane.
Like the lizard keychain. I remember that was like a 90s thing, the lizard keychain things.
Yeah, she's made ties. She's made she made a bracelet that has a rotating part inside of it that's more beads. And the one thing that I love about my daughter is that when she finds a hobby or a passion, man, she just like leans in. So like I'm really happy to follow her through this and I've had to like walk her because this is like I think she calls it like it's a ladder, right? And
Mhm.
you see it more when like because she has like obviously wider ones now. This was one of her first practice ones. And she made it in my favorite colors, which I love. But so she's gotten more intricate with it, and she does the same with art too. So she's like huge into digital art, and then even like regular media as well too. Um, so it's just been really eye opening to really explore more creative avenues with her because you and I are in a very like digital age of things. Like the internet is and has been such a strong influence for a lot of us. But this generation that we're raising, while the internet exists and while there is like YouTube brain rot and stuff like that, and they do experience that. I love seeing the things that they do outside of technology,
Mhm.
and it just kind of helps reconnect them as humans versus like people that just interface with electronics all day. So I'm loving that. Holidays are here. Thanksgiving was amazing. My wife cooked a fantastic Thanksgiving dinner. That's like her pride is just like she won't cook any other day of the year, but Thanksgiving, she's like out of my kitchen.
Yeah.
She's got the menu set. It's the same every year, and we all love it. So yeah, I just been really like trying to stay in tune with like not off grid, but like just like not connected. Is that like just like like living life one day at a time, like in the moment
I mean, it goes by quick, man. I was, reflecting on my kid's birthday this past weekend was like I blinked and she's 7. So like you're right, it goes by so fast, and it's in unplugging from the day-to-day stuff just to have real moments, real experiences are important. So 100% I agree with that.
for sure. Well, with that being said, let's wrap up. I think one of the things that we definitely want to invite are people's opinions or suggestions based on the topic today. I think today was probably one of the first times we talked about something that could be super controversial both ways. And I think for us to kind of learn from our audience, like, are you for those following a path of redemption, or is it one mistake and that's it? You're out, get out of here, go to Mickey jail, like you're done.
Exile on Mickey Island.
But anything like that, like, let us know and also provide us feedback. Like this is our 6th episode recorded. I think there's an episode lost somewhere we haven't published, but we'll figure that out. But I think Dr. Laura and I are learning a lot from this pre-recorded and edited footage versus live. I don't know if you guys ever see me on some other podcasts, but they're typically live and it's a little bit different. So here we get to plan a little bit more of the episodes and we'd love to hear your feedback and maybe get some ideas on like subjects you'd love to talk about. What are some areas that you struggle with mental health and TCGs and kind of how they cross together or kind of like you want to be a great TCG player, but you feel blocked because of a lot of anxiety or, maybe depression or things that affect us in our daily life. Or we use TCGs for an escape and too much of escape from reality. Anything like that, let us know, whether in the YouTube comments or on socials. We'll be sure to share those socials in the description below. With that being said, have a great evening. Dr. Lore, have a good night.
You too.
If we don't connect before Christmas or we're gonna try to, but the
Yes.
holidays are tough, but, we'll obviously see each other in person next weekend, but if we don't get a chance to do an episode prior, I hope that you have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
You too, sir. I'll be talking to you soon.
Awesome, take care.